Welcome.
Morning.
I'm afraid you're on your own to start with due to train delays from your fellow witness. But if we could get started with you, I'd be very grateful. Perhaps you could just introduce yourself to start with.
Sure. Good morning, my name is Michelle Jarman-Howe. I'm the Executive Director of Public Sector Prisons in the South.
Excellent. So what part of how big an area is the South?
So it's everything, currently, it's everything from Lincoln to Dartmoor, basically. So that bottom half of the country going across, everything below the Midlands.
Good. So could you summarise what the general position is across the prison estate with regard to conventional smoking? As we hear about the ban on smoking in prisons, but we've heard also about issues with its implementation. Where do we currently stand across the prison estate? So
we've been rolling out a smoking ban effectively since early summer 2016. And we've done that in a phased approach, so groups of prisons have been introducing non-smoking. Currently the position in the organisation is that 96 out of 102 of the closed public sector prisons are operating as non-smoking environments. The remainder 96 of 102? Yeah, of the closed
So prisons. We're almost there?
We're almost there. So there's some prisons in Greater London that will look to roll out over the coming weeks and months, subject to individual risk assessments, but they're part of the final phase, so we are where we expect it to be, effectively.
And is it on track, or has it taken longer than expected to implement?
No, it's on track, I believe. Yeah, it's entirely on track. I don't think we... so whilst individual sites may have made a decision to defer slightly by a couple of weeks.
You haven't been alone for too long.
That's fine, it's no problem at all.
Do come forward. So welcome, and just to interrupt very briefly, I'm sorry you've had difficulties with your travel arrangements. I'm sure it's been rather stressful, but thank you for attending. Would you like to just introduce yourself very quickly?
Yes, I'm Heather Thomson. I am the Smokefree lead for Nottinghamshire Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust.
Fine, good. So at the moment where I'm dealing with the prison estate and where the process of implementing a no smoking policy has got to, and I'll come to you in a few moments. So it's on track.
It's on track. So individual establishments take a view with their operational line managers about the exact timing of whether or not a prison is ready to go smoke-free. So we like to give as much notice as possible to offenders and to staff to ensure to make sure that they can adapt and work with healthcare partners to ensure that individuals or prisons are ready. But there is a point prior to that establishment moving to a smoke-free position where a kind of go-no-go decision is made about whether that feels right and safe for that establishment at that time. So individual prisons may move slightly on the timeline, but essentially, actually, as a service, we are where we expect to be.
And from how you describe the line between north and south, it sounds like, are all the remaining prisons in your region?
Yeah, so they're all around the Greater London area. And I should say as well, to distinguish in the open estate, so the open prison estate, whilst that part of the estate went smoke-free within offender and accommodation several years ago, the open estate currently offenders can smoke still in designated areas outside.
And is there a plan to change that?
That's being considered currently, yes. So we hope to move to a position of the open estate being smoke-free.
So you haven't made a decision as to whether to proceed? It's still a policy decision to be made?
So the policy is that the entire estate will go smoke-free. The decision about the timing is happening this week, actually. In fact, it's tomorrow. So it's just coincidentally.
The decision will be made tomorrow?
Absolutely,
on timing.
About the timing, yeah.
Okay. And have you got a date for when you anticipate that the closed prisons will, the programme will be completed? When do you expect all of those London prisons?
End of April. End of April, yes. So it's a number of establishments are going in the first week of April, and then there'll be no-go decisions for the remainder. So all of them should be there by the end of the April. So we're very close.
So then, alongside that, what's the policy on e-cigarette use and availability?
So for the purpose of the committee, if I can distinguish between e-cigarette, traditional kind of e-cigarette, and vaping. So at the point at which the service introduced no smoking, offenders could access disposable e-cigarettes to the offender canteen system in the public sector in closed sites. And then later last year, I think it was October 17, we also enabled offenders to access rechargeable vaping facilities, which proved to be far more
So to start with, you allowed disposable e-cigs, and then
we moved to a position to also enable access to vaping arrangements as well for establishments. So currently the position is completely consistent with all prisons really in terms of their access to that facility. It's been enormously helpful for us actually, for offenders and for staff to be able to access vaping, and which have been more popular, to be fair, than the traditional electronic cigarettes.
So all prisons now have facilities for recharging e-cigarettes, is that right?
They can buy the chargers, I understand. I don't think you need separate. I think they just plug in. So I don't vape personally. I think they just plug in. Yes. So all offenders can access that through their canteen, including the private sector. And
could you say something about the implementation process and what the experience has been like? There have been reports of tension and stress, and in some cases violence. I take it that you've worked your way through that, but just describe what the process has been like and how difficult or easy it has been.
Yeah. So obviously we're very experienced as a large operational organisation in taking kind of risk-based decisions and introducing operational policy change. A huge amount of work was done in advance of introducing the policy around kind of assessing likely intelligence, and that continues to be the case prison by prison as we seek to introduce rollout. And a significant amount of time and attention was given to contingency planning around any potential for disorder when we introduced no smoking. The reality has been, though, actually, that whilst there has been some low-level local issues, as you might expect during any policy change, we haven't had any significant issues of disorder that are entirely related to smoking. So it's far more likely where we have had incidents of any type, actually, if smoking has been a factor, it's been one of a number of contributory factors. So we've not lost a prison as a result of introducing non-smoking, for example.
And have you noticed any beneficial impacts of the ban in terms of improved health, perhaps in terms of reduced levels of stress and so forth? Because the evidence suggests that smoking is actually potentially stress-inducing. So have you noticed any improvements?
So certainly the prison environments where we've introduced no smoking have felt cleaner. So staff and prisoners have reported that actually the environment kind of feels clean, that the air feels cleaner, and we have done air tests in those establishments, and will continue to do so, and that provides us with a decent amount of evidence. In respect of the kind of mental health and stress, so there was a study completed, I think, in 2014 that talks about actually smoke-free and giving up smoking does have a positive impact on issues such as depression, anxiety, and that research was part of our decision-making when we were thinking about the mental health impact of going smoke-free. Generally, I would say it's been a very positive thing for the service. We've been really keen to ensure that the impact of second-hand smoke on the system is reduced as far as possible, both for offenders and for staff, to make it a clean and decent environment for people who have to live and work there. So from our perspective, actually, it's been a very positive initiative that's been extraordinarily well managed, actually, by governors and their staff.
There was a case, a legal action brought, I think, by a prisoner who wanted the ban enforced, and because Crown estates are excluded from the legislation, the conclusion was that he didn't win his case. Is that now just something that's happened in the past, but that now it is in effect enforced, that's the reality, that all of the estate is smoke-free? Or is there actually a problem that you can't enforce because of the legislation excluding Crown Estate, and that therefore there are places where smoking actually persists?
So you're talking about the black case, yes. So I will just check with my colleagues. So following on from the black case, there's been no impact for us actually. So a number of offenders have tried separate cases actually to challenge the smoking ban, none of which have been successful. So there is currently no inhibition to us continuing to roll out on a smoke-free basis. So it remains our absolute intention.
So the ban is effective, in other words?
Absolutely, that's it, apart from obviously in those sites that are still progressing
of
to
course.
it. So some of the Greater London ones, and once we make the decision around the open business, the timing of that.
Understood, thank you. Heather, the government's tobacco control plan says that, and I quote, some professionals mistakenly believe that stopping smoking could negatively affect their patients' mental health. Is that something that is that an attitude, a view that you've come across in your work, that professionals still have that misplaced view that it's going to be damaging to patients?
Very definitely. That's something that is a regular challenge when delivering training, etc. Staff are very uncomfortable about removing yet another choice from patients who might have been detained under the Mental Health Act, and see smoking as having been their coping strategy for many years.
And it's part of the culture.
It's very ingrained in the culture. I think for decades smoking's probably been seen as part of the solution rather than recognised for the additional harm and problems it's causing for people's mental well-being as well as physical well-being.
And even suggestions that there are some cases where people take up smoking in inpatient units because that's the culture that it persists in that unit. Is that right? Definitely.
I think prior to us going smoke-free in 2016, we still did have some patients who were admitted as non-smokers and left our care as smokers. And that's one of the things that I quote to our staff to show how wrong that is, given what we now know.
So you don't see any justification for making exceptions for people with severe and enduring mental ill health in inpatient units, that they should be allowed to smoke because of that traditional view that it might be seen by them as something that eases their stress and trauma?
We did try to go to smoke-free in 2008 previously with that ability for exceptions. The difficulty is when somebody's a smoker, they're not only addicted to the nicotine, they're also very hooked into the habit, and so when the triggers are around them of other people smoking, it makes it impossible not to smoke. So to make an exception just perpetuates the whole vicious circle. It's much more difficult, I think, in some scenarios, and we do have an ability to make a time-limited exception. So rather than tackling a patient to the ground, we're trying to adopt what we should be doing, the least restrictive practice. But as soon as we can remove the cigarettes, then that's what we should be doing.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, David.
Just turning to yourself again, Heather, you're from Nottinghamshire NHS Trust, so
Yes.
I appreciate you can't speak for all NHS Trusts, but you can for your own. So do you want to tell us about the pilot that's been happening in your trust, and what were the results and the lessons you've learned from that?
We started very small, in 3 units just prior to going smoke-free, and the feedback that we had was very, very positive, with all 3 unit managers stating that they would like to see this continued, and more than 60% of patients who'd used the e-cigarettes, the one particular e-cigarette that we've allowed, reporting that it has really helped them. The success of that was reported to our team of executives, who approved us to roll that out then to all 23 inpatient mental health units, which we did in July of last year, and gathered evidence again after 2 or 3 months of that being available to patients, with resounding positive feedback. More than 80% of our patients who smoke have and are using the e-cigarettes that we're providing. There's nicotine replacement therapy, which is licensed and research-based, is still the first-line offer, but we are also enabling the e-cigarette, and it's proven very popular.
Happy with that? Can you do, with regard to e-cigarettes, what is your policy about where they can be used?
That's more tricky. The procedure gives an overarching guide, which is that they shouldn't be used in communal areas because of the concerns of renormalising smoking or normalising vaping, and wanting to avoid a circumstance where somebody might come into our care not using e-cigarettes and then leave using them. So we've said non-communal areas. That would include sort of the courtyard areas where people traditionally smoked, that people can use them in their bedrooms or in discrete areas. We've left that really, we've got 23 inpatient units, as I previously said. They're all very different, and it's very difficult to adopt a one-size-fits-all throughout each of those units. So the policy really has allowed each unit manager to use their discretion where e-cigarettes can and should be used in their particular unit.
And staff have changed their attitudes as a result of their experience, is that right? Or are there still staff that don't really believe the policy?
Yes, I would say there are. I think we did an awful lot of training face-to-face with people in order to try and win hearts and minds, to try and reach as many people as possible, to help challenge those misperceptions. I think for people, staff who may smoke, it's very uncomfortable to address smoking with a patient because people feel hypocritical. So we're trying through our face-to-face training to raise awareness of the fact that there are lots of our own personal behaviours and beliefs that we have to leave at the door to do our job because we work for Nottinghamshire Healthcare Trust. There are still some staff where it's a challenge, but I feel 18 months on that we are a smoke-free site. That doesn't mean to say we never have people smoking on site, but it means that I can say with confidence each and every person who smokes and is admitted to our care is now having very different conversations about smoking than they've ever had before. And that's not just our very small smoke-free team, that's the nursing teams on the wards who are making sure that patients are given nicotine replacement therapy or e-cigarettes within 20 minutes of arrival on units, and that's working most of the time.
Interesting. So. And have you done any evaluation of the impact on health in these early periods, and in terms of the impact of the atmosphere on the ward, the levels of stress and anxiety and so forth?
The only evaluation we've done is the feedback from patients. It's not proper research, but we've had feedback from patients, and it was over 60% of patients felt that they had benefits in terms of mood and health. So noticed things like less breathless, more energy, better appetite, which obviously we don't want to go the other way. But there are lots of health benefits that start. One of the things that we do look at closely, and I'm sorry I haven't got the numbers because we've not evaluated the numbers, but is how frequently somebody's carbon monoxide reading is reduced. And that happens very, very quickly. So it's there, we haven't gathered it.
But the availability of vaping has facilitated this shift of policy, is that right?
It's definitely helped, yes. Staff feedback has said that it's absolutely helped. Before the 23 units were using the e-cigarettes, they were having more difficulties. We have got somebody working in our analysis team who's looked at incidences of violence, untoward incidences, and it's difficult to analyse exactly because any incident that's got smoking written in it is collected. But there was a fall in incidences around the time that we introduced the e-cigarettes to all 23 units.
Right. Stephen and then Neil.
Thank you. Just a small technical point, which was, I think you said you allow one e-cigarette, one type. Can you just explain why it is that you have restricted it to one, and whether it's an e-cigarette or a vaping device?
It's an e-cigarette, which is still a vaping device. The reason that when I first came into post in 2015, the board were very uncertain and very nervous about any e-cigarettes. I think there were concerns about the charging, fire risks, the managing the charging, but also in our settings, the worry about illicit substances being added to liquids. So we would not be able to tell what's in the liquid, and also the possibility for the device to be weaponised. So the one product that we went with has been designed with lots of safety features in mind. It's tamper evident, it's not tamper proof, but it had got a lot of safety features.
Thank you very much. Can I just therefore just ask Michelle, did you have the same thought process when thinking about what to allow in prisons?
The service trialled a number of options before we went for so we selected a brand of e-cigarettes in the initial rollout following a number of pilots and trials and making sure that we had something that was of reasonable quality. So we operated with the kind of e-cigarettes and make the distinction between e-cigarettes and vaping for the first year of the pilot. We then introduced a broader range to allow vaping, rechargeable vaping devices to be used, which have in our experience now proved to be more popular actually than the traditional e-cigarette. The issue for us with the e-cigarette was that I understand that they contained the equivalent of 300 to 400 puffs and we found that offenders were getting through one of those as though they were a single cigarette. So there was an issue about learning. So we've tried to go through a process at each phase of the rollout of kind of lessons learned, so actually to inform our decisions going forward to that.
But you weren't as concerned about things like charging regimes and adding substances to liquids?
We are concerned, of course, and we continue to take a view around intelligence, around security challenges that having any of this equipment can provide for us. So we know, for example, that it's kind of common knowledge that psychoactive substances are a particular issue in prisons at the moment, and the reduction of tobacco has meant that offenders can use that substance in a slightly different way, and we are aware that some of these devices can be used for purposes that they are not intended for, as many devices can in prisons. Actually, offenders will find use for bits of equipment, but generally our very significant security concerns haven't really played out. Actually, the issue for us has been about controlling contraband and issues such as.
But you're sticking, Heather, with the disposable version. You have no plan to widen it as the prison service has done to allow the recharging.
We haven't at the moment. I'm just looking at reviewing the procedure to make it mainstream rather than just a trial. I think as emerging evidence arises, that's something that we're going to have under constant review. And I know that there are other mental health trusts where they are taking a more relaxed approach to e-cigarettes, and we're looking at what the evidence there is.
Neil, thank you.
Mrs. Milley, what sort of advice and resources does the NHS give to trusts like yours in order to make decisions about e-cigarette policy?
I would say that the Public Health England guide for employees looking at vaping in workplaces is the closest. We haven't got anything specific that I've been made aware of that is advising trusts exactly how and what to do about this. Again,
so there's no advice from the NHS?
Well, there is advice from the NHS, basically, that Public Health England is saying that, as we've all heard, vaping is likely to be 95% less harmful, and so therefore...
But there's only that generic advice, nothing more than that.
No.
Yeah. So it is would it be fair to say it's basically left to the trusts themselves to decide? Would that be fair summary?
Yes.
Very good. Do you think it would be beneficial for trusts to have a central policy, or do you think it's enough to just sort of base, as you've done, on common guidance and then interpret it individually? Would you be helpful to have central thing or not?
I think it would be really useful for us to sit together, to pull the learning together and have some central guidance personally. I feel that would be helpful.
Is anyone sort of monitoring what's going on? Is there a sort of point person that you could go and talk to in the NHS? Is anyone sort of creating a network of people like you who are doing things this way?
I'm not aware of that. There probably is through the tobacco alliances.
What are the tobacco alliances?
The Smokefree Action Coalition.
Right.
I think that there's lots of information that's pulled together there. I haven't contributed to that, but I would be willing to.
Yeah. And is there any other kind of network of any other trusts come to you to ask you about your experience, or are you in touch with anyone else?
we're sharing best practice between ourselves. So I very much looked at what South London and Maudsley and Cheshire and Wirral had done, because they'd gone smoke-free prior to us, and took the lead for the way that we started from there.
Which trust was that?
South London and Maudsley and Cheshire and Wirral.
Okay.
Since we've been using the e-cigarettes, several organisations have come to me and asked for me to share what we've done within Nottinghamshire, which I've done, and the report that I wrote here has been useful because I forwarded that, and that's been really helpful.
Very helpful, thank you.
And I guess in terms of the sort of case for national guidance, having gone through it yourself in your trust, is it your view that this actually is something that ought to be given some priority, given that smoking is one of the largest causes of premature mortality, and that in your experience the provision of vaping has facilitated a shift of people's experience?
I think it would be helpful. I think we're going smoke-free at different times with different approaches, but to have some central guidance would be very useful, because I think there's an anxiety about bringing something in that might, in years to come, prove to have been harmful. However, we need to balance that against the risks of the fact that we absolutely know the harms that are associated with smoking. So anything that I think allays those fears and lays the foundations would be useful.
Just remind me, has every mental health trust now gone smoke-free?
There's a call from Public Health England for every mental health trust to be smoke-free. I think it's by April 2018.
Right. So we're not. It's a similar position to the prison estate.
Yes, and acute trust by 2020.
Okay. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks. It's related to obviously e-cigarettes. Do either have any data available, research or anecdotal evidence as to how staff are concerned about being exposed to second-hand e-cigarette vapor? Do you have any knowledge of where staff are concerned about it?
The only thing that we have is the feedback that we got. I think we got feedback from 11 of the 23 unit managers and from 64 staff, I think. And within that, there were one or two concerns raised about second-hand vape. Yeah. The device that we allow doesn't produce plumes of vape. That's one of the advantages. There's not a huge amount of vape from it.
Make it more widely available.
It is available. It is available from. Yeah, it is widely available.
So we continue to work with staff associations who, of course, are continually reminding us of our responsibilities around staff safety in particular. So we haven't received any widespread complaints about second-hand smoke from vaping or electronic smoking devices. We take our position from the advice of the Public Health England, which say that they are less harmful substance than that which is used by traditional cigarettes. So we'll keep the position. Obviously, as more research comes out in the future, we'll continue to review the position. But currently, we've not had significant issues from staff on it.
Right. Do you think that what appears to be emerging, the risk of second-hand vapor is significantly less than that of a second-hand smoke? Do you think there is a perception out there that people see the risk being equal? Are we conveying that the risk is? Are we advising people that it is not the risk that cigarette smoke is? And do you think that staff fully understand that?
No, I don't. I think because an e-cigarette or a vapor can produce so much more vapour, people feel that it's much more harmful. Yeah. It can still be irritant, and I think that's one of the misperceptions that. It's funny, in our units there is still occasion where some people are smoking, which obviously needs to be dealt with as soon as possible, but there's more concern from staff about sticking to the rules stringently sometimes with regard to where somebody can use their e-cigarette, and so I think it's challenging those misperceptions that we haven't really got to the bottom of with people and where the concerns come from.
similar in the
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be fair, the service has done a good job in its communication strategy. As we say, we take a kind of risk-based approach as we roll out in phases and site by site to ensure that we've tried to address those concerns. Governors have excellent relationships with health partners operating within their establishments. So there is a big focus in the run-up to a prison going smoke-free on communicating effectively with both staff and prisoners. As I say, at the moment we've had very little pushback from staff around e-cigarettes, and we've encouraged staff to go smoke-free and reduce their smoking as part of our strategy as well.
As a former smoker, it's a good thing to give up. Moving on, and putting aside what Heather had mentioned, I think there was a risk of liquid tampering, we'd call it, and the risk of possible fire with charging systems. Professor Aviard from the Cochrane Review advised us some weeks ago that there are no reasons on health grounds why e-cigarettes should be banned in prisons or indeed mental health facilities. Would you agree with that statement? He's saying on health reasons.
Well, I would agree that vaping e-cigarettes, there should be provision for people within mental health units or any health organisation to be able to vape as opposed to smoking.
So you would agree that he suggests there's no reason to ban it?
No.
Would that be the same?
Yes, on the basis of the current research, we would take the view that it's less harmful.
In getting that agreement, are there any circumstances in which e-cigarettes should still be banned in parts or zones or elements of prisons or elements of mental health facilities? Is there no-go areas within the facilities where you would put a ban on e-cigarettes, or is it?
Personally, I still think that there should be some restrictions around communal areas because it can be uncomfortable for the people. The vapour can be irritant, it can be annoying, and so I think our procedure, our revised procedure, will be really promoting consideration for others, and everybody sitting in one area vaping could be uncomfortable, so we need to be sort of trying to avoid that, but I don't think we need a specific anywhere where they should be specifically banned.
The restriction could be banned in a recreation facility, a library, kitchens, etc.
I wouldn't say so. From the research and from our evidence.
So our policy is room only. So we don't. So we wouldn't allow, for example, offenders to smoke in kitchen areas or education or work areas.
So it's confined to
so it is
room only,
confined to rooms, and obviously in the open state it's slightly different. But yeah, and our view is that actually, so apart from the fact of obviously not trying to encourage that behaviour, but also there's a degree of normalising. So when offenders are released, if they are going to a workplace, it's unlikely that they would be able to vape in open work areas. So there is something about trying to normalise.
Just if there's something, you're using the term room only, and I'm pleased to note that I'm not overly familiar with the prison environment, but is there still shared facilities, or is it individual rooms, as they say? The reason for the question, if two people were sharing or whatever, there may be conflict here, or is it single occupancy?
So we have got cells that have got shared accommodation, and the governors will take all steps appropriate to ensure that non-smokers are not sharing, for example. So all prisons have entirely non-smoking wings available to them, where non-smokers can choose to be, choose to be.
Conflict avoidance policies, where you get zones,
yeah,
etc.
Absolutely. And we have a cell share risk assessment policy that takes into account all sorts of risks around offenders sharing rooms. So governors are quite well versed in how to manage that.
Thank you for that.
Neil,
Just a brief question: is it in any of the prisons, is it possible to vape in your cell, or is it always in a sort of area?
No, it's only in rooms. Yeah, only in cells. Yeah.
it's only in the cell?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And thank you, Bill. Carol.
Thank you. Heather, in your opinion, is there anything that NHS England Mental Health Trust should be learning from the prison service in terms of their approach to e-cigarettes?
I'm not sure that that's for me to judge, to be honest.
Sorry, I was directed.
Again, I'm not sure that that's... I think probably we could learn from one another. I think we're having different experiences, as Cheryl's just answered the question about only vaping in cells. I understand it's a very different environment. What we don't want to do is to create patients to become more isolated than maybe they were. So if somebody is a 40-a-day smoker usually, and one e-cigarette lasts for 30 cigarettes, and they can only use it in their room, we might find that they have even less interaction. So what we want to do is try and encourage them to be a part of activities that are going on, and if using vaping during an activity enables them to remain focused and within that activity, then that's part of their therapeutic recovery, and that's a good thing. So I think there are crossovers, but again, it's very difficult to say one size fits all.
Okay, within then maybe mental health trusts and maybe within also prison services, can you see that one coherent policy across mental health trusts might be useful and one coherent policy across prison service might be useful, or are there still inconsistencies and different approaches?
I don't know who's going to answer. Do you
You can both answer.
So we have got a coherent system approach. We found that very beneficial because offenders move around our system, they don't stay in one prison, and for us it's very useful that there is a clear expectation about what a prison environment will look and feel like. So whilst of course there's been, as the non-smoking policy has rolled out, we have had parts of the system that have been smoking while other parts have been non-smoking, but it's been a stated intention of the service to move to a non-smoking position, and
with e-cigarettes available in every prison.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and that consistency I think has been a benefit for us. I think we have had the experience as we've introduced rollout in certain sites where prisoners almost believe that it's not going to come, it's actually not going to happen. But as we've rolled out more and more across the country, there is increasingly an acceptance once that non-smoking date is set for a site that will happen. And as I say, actually, it's largely been successful having that consistent approach, giving individual establishments the option around just a slight adjustment to timing as we move towards the date to ensure that we're taking into account operational intelligence risk.
I would assume that makes it easier when staff possibly move from establishment to establishment. There's already absolutely an understanding. Heather, what's your thoughts then in terms of mental health trusts?
Yeah, I think it would be very useful. Again, our patients can move from one area to another, and that lack of consistency can cause real problems. A one-size-fits-all, again, though, one of the difficulties that we really had, because we were only allowing the one particular type of e-cigarette, is that of how to actually get it to our patients, because in some trusts there are retail outlets. We don't have any retail outlets at all, so the only way we could sort of start the ball rolling was to actually provide them for our patients on a short-term basis to start with. So it's how that would look could be quite complicated.
So how have they in the past got hold of tobacco if you don't have any retail outlets? Is it all just brought in by visitors?
No, some patients have leave, some patients have escorted leave, so
Sure.
if they're going to the shop they can go and buy tobacco products. That they would be able to go and buy disposable e-cigarettes, but not the type that we've saying that they can use for all the reasons that we're saying. But that's the one. So it was more difficult.
Okay.
And finally, you've both, I believe, indicated that you think consistency across different establishments is of benefit. But I think your answers have also, you've kind of answered my final question, which is about the consistency across both types of establishment. And what you're really saying, you can maybe just confirm this, is that prisons, mental health trusts are so very different with so very different people using them, that actually consistency across both these things is not particularly helpful.
I feel like I can only speak for the service really and our approach for the prison service. So whilst we have of course a number of offenders with mental health conditions that we take into account as we've rolled out this policy, and we did engage actually with secure mental health units as we were considering introducing the policy, just to kind of get learning and best practice. The prison service operates in a different way. I guess is probably as far as I could say. It doesn't think
But Heather, from your point of view, you don't see, from what you've said, any case for some mental health trusts banning e-cigarettes, for example. You think, from your experience, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think your evidence is that from your experience, a combination of a ban on tobacco, but an availability of e-cigarettes is a sensible mix. Is that right?
What I probably haven't said and need to make clear is that the e-cigarettes that we're using in the trial that we've had has been in our adult mental health units and not in our forensic division. So colleagues are just starting to look in the forensic division about how and if we will be introducing the e-cigarettes there.
So what's the position in your forensic division?
There are no vaping in our forensic division.
So it's smoke-free but no vaping?
That's right, yes. And actually they've been smoke-free since 2012 and have got that off to a T, really, so they didn't really see a need to change. Nicotine replacement therapy is used very well, but there's more control, obviously. Within our mental health units, we have a lot of patients who are less formal and who volunteer to be admitted, and the fear before we went smoke-free was that number of people volunteering would go down. So we are in a very different environment, and the checking and searching of patients is more difficult, and we're trying to be least restrictive.
And you want to be, yes, less restrictive.
Yeah. And I can't really speak for all mental health trusts. I work with Nottinghamshire Healthcare Trust. I don't know about the complexities of other trusts. Ours is very complex. I wouldn't like to say that I can speak on behalf, but if I'm speaking about mental health patients and the harm reduction that they can benefit from having access to e-cigarettes and being able to vape, I would say we should be trying to make sure that everybody has access where we can.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Any final questions from anyone? No? Thank you both very much indeed. Very much appreciate you coming down. Thank you. You could relax. Both of you, do you want to introduce yourselves very quickly?
I'm Deborah Arnott, Chief Executive of Action on Smoking and Health.
I'm Hazel, Cheeseman, I'm Director of Policy at ASH, and here representing the Mental Health and Smoking Partnership and the Smoking and Pregnancy Challenge Group, which I can talk more about as we go on.
But also, Heather mentioned the Smokefree Action Coalition, which is a group of over 300 organisations interested in tobacco control, including local authorities, NHS organisations, charities, etc., which we coordinate, and we try and ensure that there's a consistent approach to tobacco control issues through the Smokefree Action Coalition.
Great, thank you very much. Now, I think it's right that ASH have published some statistics on e-cigarettes this morning. Perhaps one of you could start by summarising the findings of that work, as well as telling us about your general position on e-cigarettes, and also perhaps include reference to heat-not-burn products as well.
So, do you want to start? We'll start with talking through the new data,
yes,
and then move on to the
sort of policy positions.
Okay, so the data that we've shared with you this morning is from our annual YouGov data. So we do a survey every year in February, March with YouGov, and the adult survey is around 12,000 adults, and the youth survey is around 2,500 children. The survey, the adult survey, shows that we have continued small, steady increase in the use of electronic cigarettes among smokers and ex-smokers, and also an increase in the number of ex-smokers reporting that they used to use electronic cigarettes. In our view, this use among ex-smokers, the steady increase among ex-smokers and who are currently using and who used to use, is a good sign, and appears to indicate that these products are being used as a way of quitting smoking. The reasons that people are using e-cigarettes hasn't changed a great deal over the course that we've been running this survey. Primarily, smokers and ex-smokers are using these products to abstain from smoking, to engage in a quit attempt, or to cut down the amount that they're smoking. But also, one of the things that's very important, it would appear, for the use of electronic cigarettes is the price difference between using electronic cigarettes and and smoking, and that's more important for people in lower socioeconomic groups with one would expect lower incomes. One of the things that's been really important through the survey that we've done over a number of years is tracking the public's understanding of the relative risks from electronic cigarettes versus tobacco smoking. What we have found over time is that the public's perception of e-cigarettes is becoming more inaccurate, that people are more likely to think that electronic cigarettes are as harmful or more harmful as tobacco smoking. There was some good news from this year's survey in that there is an increase in the proportion of adults, both in the general population and among smokers, who believe electronic cigarettes are less harmful than smoking. We don't see the same trend among young people, and that may be to do with the size of our sample and some problems with the data, but it may also be that young people simply get their information from different places from adults. So certainly something to keep an eye on. So briefly to mention the findings in relation to young people, what we aren't seeing very big changes in young people's use of electronic cigarettes, particularly among young people that don't smoke. That use has been low throughout the time that we've been running this survey and continues to be very low. So young people that don't smoke are not regularly
so we're not
using
seeing a risk there that this is an attractive thing in its own right.
From our survey data, the young people that are using electronic cigarettes appear also to be the young people which are smoking and trying other things, and that seems to be supported by data from elsewhere in the UK. Yeah. So we don't, we can talk about that more as we go on, but the primary issue still among young people is the prevalence of tobacco smoking rather than the prevalence of vaping. And we did look at some issues in relation to regulations as well in the data, and one of the things which we asked was whether people were more reassured by the fact that we have a regulatory framework around e-cigarettes in the TPD. And it does appear that smokers are more likely to be reassured when they understand that there's a regulatory framework, but there's still a large group of smokers who are not reassured, and so I think there's more work to do in relation to reassuring smokers that these are products that are safe for them to use. Shall I leave it there and we can talk about the policy?
I think, yeah, that's fine, unless you've got more questions about it.
That's very helpful, thank you. So can we move on then to your general position as it stands now on e-cigarettes and then also heat-not-burn products? Okay,
well, first of all, we believe public policy should be evidence-based, so we're really pleased that the Science and Technology Committee is carrying out this inquiry. I mean, as Hazel said, smoking remains the leading cause of preventable premature death in the UK. It's uniquely harmful, killing more people than the next 6 causes put together. And e-cigarette regulation and e-cigarette harms need to be put in that context. And as PHE and others have said, the evidence to date is that e-cigarettes are substantially less harmful than smoking, but not risk-free. I think the other thing is about how they're perceived, and we've got a regulatory framework in the UK, but we've also got support for use for e-cigarettes for harm reduction from the Department of Health, from Public Health England, from organisations like ourselves, Royal College of Physicians, BMA, etc. And I think that's quite important. And actually, although there's still misperceptions, there are fewer misperceptions or a lower level of misperception about the relative risk in this country than, for example, the US or Australia or other countries. I'd also like to say that we are now a global leader in tobacco control, and our policy on e-cigarettes is within that context, that we have some of the most stringent regulation of tobacco in the world. We're up there with Australia, which was the first country before us to introduce plain packaging. And actually, since e-cigarettes have taken off, our rates of smoking have declined more rapidly than Australia, and we're now down to very similar levels of smoking to Australia. And I think that's a sign that, while you can't prove causality, that the policy that has been put forward by government and civil society over recent years, and the MHRA and NICE as well, has actually been helpful in reducing smoking prevalence, and that's really important.
What are we down to now, 15.5% or something?
I think for the UK it's 15.8%, for England it's 15.5%. So, that's a major improvement when you think in 2000 it was 27%. Yeah. So we support regulation to
and
manage...
he's one of them.
Well, I think, there are a lot of ex-smokers around this room, I'm sure. I'm certainly one of them too. So, we support regulation to manage the risks but maximise the opportunities. And one of the points I'd like to make, we feel very strongly about, is that we're pleased that there's a consumer product regulatory system that doesn't seem to be undermining e-cigarette use. It's required in the regulations that be reviewed within 5 years, and we think that's appropriate. But at the moment, it's not undermining use of e-cigarettes. However, we think there would be considerable benefits to having licensed medicinal products on the market. Basically, unless you have a licensed product, it can't be promoted and advertised and put on prescription for quitting smoking.
Well, can I just stop you there briefly? Would there be a case perhaps for simply allowing, if we know that e-cigarettes help people stop smoking, should e-cigarettes manufacturers be able to say that on their marketing material?
It's very difficult because actually the medicinal licensing system, and that's a UK situation, it's not just an EU thing, means that if you're going to promote them for cessation, they have to be medicinally licensed. So the messaging has to be...
But does that make sense?
Well,
we have a product here we know helps people give up smoking. Why can't people say that?
I think you can say it, but you've got to be careful how you say it. And actually, on the medicinal licensing point, you need to talk to the MHRA. But my understanding is it will require a complete overhaul of the medicinal licensing system to enable that to happen. But I think there is also a benefit to having licensed products, because we know that it would reassure doctors. I mean, the BMA has said it would be helpful. We have doctors saying to us all the time, if we had products we could prescribe and that were licensed, we'd feel much more comfortable. And they would be effective on prescription and highly cost effective. I mean, there have been criticisms, why should they be on prescription? These are cheap products which are highly effective in helping smokers quit. And it would be reassuring to consumers as well as to the medical profession.
Do we think there's evidence that there's a cohort of people who aren't being persuaded to give up smoking and simply choose a commercial product that's available, but who could be persuaded to give up if it was prescribed?
We think as part of a comprehensive approach, yes, it could work. We know that there are quite a lot of smokers who are not reassured by the consumer regulation and are concerned about the risks as part of a coordinated strategy. And I'm not saying instead of consumer products, but as well as consumer products. I think it would be very helpful there are still large numbers of smokers who've either not tried these products or tried them and not actually really used them to best effect, either because they don't find them attractive enough or because of their lack of sort of sense of security that this is what they should be doing. Smokers who try vaping, who don't succeed, who carry on dual using, often have very mixed views about the whole thing. So I think, yes, it would help.
If I could add something as well, there is certainly a group of people, particularly looking at people with a mental health condition, where although using an electronic cigarette is for most people cheaper than continuing to smoke, there is a barrier to entry. There is an initial cost that you have to make, and for somebody on a low income, that's quite a risk to take potentially if you're not sure if the product will work for you. So having something on prescription can help to ease that risk for people, but also it will lock people into a relationship with medical professionals and quit services, which we know can significantly improve people's chances of quitting successfully. So having something on prescription would be a benefit for both those reasons as well, I think. And looking at groups that are vulnerable and have high levels of addiction and face lots of barriers to quitting, I think a prescription product can be really valuable.
And certainly the evidence from the Stop Smoking Service returns is that stop smoking services who are encouraging e-cigarette use are finding higher rates of quitting, and that e-cigarettes are a useful addition, but it's difficult to do that when there's not a prescription product available. And I mean, the Tobacco Control Plan for England recommended that the MHRA ensure that the route to medicinal regulation is fit for purpose, so that a range of safe and effective products can potentially be made available for NHS prescription, and we really encourage.
Where did that recommendation come from?
That's in the Tobacco Control Plan for England. And I would imagine you're going to have the MHRA coming before you. I would really recommend that you actually urge them to review that system, because to date, although there have been products that have gone through the system, none have come to market. And I think the more the MHRA can do to make that system fit for purpose.
So do you think that's a question of MHRA having too high a barrier, a hurdle to clear? When you ask them when you're asking them to review the process, what do you see it changing to?
Well, I think it's about encouragement as much as anything else. I mean, at a point in time when the MHRA said that was the only route it was going to take before the TPD was developed, there was much more interest in companies. Now, I think what happened is when the TPD process came into place, naturally the companies focused on that, and so did the MHRA quite rightly. It had to get that system right, and I think they did a very good job. But now is the time for them to actually refocus their attention on the medicinal licensing system and on encouraging companies to come forward and making clear to them what the system is. Also, I mean, there are benefits because it's an authorisation, not a notification process. The information we're getting from the notification process is useful, but it's not the same quality of evidence as we will get from products having to go through the authorisation system. It means that products have to be made to good manufacturing practice standards, which means they'll be the highest quality products, but that has a cost. Now, over-the-counter nicotine replacement therapy can be sold at 5% VAT as opposed to 20%. I've been trying to get clarification from the Treasury for a number of years now on whether that would be true for e-cigarettes. It should be, because these products will be very different from the consumer products in the packaging and the labelling. Even if they're made by the same company, the standards they'll be made to will be different. But again, I think that's something that the committee could usefully get clarification on.
Is there a possibility that just as e-cigarettes appear to be more attractive for many people than the traditional nicotine replacement therapy, because it's a sort of consumer product and more attractive in that respect, is there a danger that a prescribed medically licensed product is actually less attractive to people than a consumer product that's marketed and so forth through normal...
Well, people will have the choice,
Sure.
and it's about creating greater choice and greater opportunity, I suppose. But also, you could, Viagra's prescribed, temazepam's prescribed. That doesn't mean they're not
Sure.
widely used for...
And do we have any idea whether there's any interest from producers in putting forward a product for licensing through the MHRA?
Yes, I mean, one product was put forward to the MHRA just before Christmas. A number of manufacturers have come and talked to me and are interested, but they want more certainty and they want more encouragement, because it's a big investment to put a product through the licensing process.
Hazel?
No.
Can we deal with heat not burn?
Yes.
And your view on that?
Well, currently our survey shows, and so do other surveys, that there's very low levels of use. As you know, the Committee on Toxicity has looked at heat-not-burn products and concluded that they're likely to be less harmful than cigarettes. They haven't specifically compared them to e-cigarettes, but certainly if you look at what these products are delivering, they're likely to be somewhere between combustible tobacco and e-cigarettes, and then NRT sort of... less risky still.
Presumably, in part, the levels of use are low because they're not permitted to market them.
Well, they're permitted to market them. They're not permitted to advertise them.
Right.
And I mean, I'm slightly cautious about heated tobacco products. They've been very successful in Japan, but if you look at Japan, e-cigarettes are not allowed. My view is that the transnational tobacco companies who you've heard from have designed heated tobacco products to replicate the smoking experience and replicate their stranglehold on the market. So if you take IQOS, the most widely known product, you buy a device and then you buy packs of 20 heat sticks which you use in it, which are proprietary products, difficult to copy and quite expensive. Now, e-cigarettes are much cheaper, and I can go into the relative prices now if you're interested, because I think it is quite salutary. And are not so proprietary. If you buy a device that's an open system, you can then use any e-liquid you want. And that's a benefit to consumers. So I'm not at the moment. I think it's appropriate they're legal and on the market under a notification process. But I think we need to see how that develops. I wouldn't be...
And would you argue for taxation based on level of risk on the evidence?
Yes, and I mean, it's difficult to know exactly what that level of risk is. They are... e-cigarettes only have VAT. Heated tobacco products have... excise tax in line with other tobacco products. I've got the exact figures in my submission, but you don't need those at the moment, which are much less than for combustible tobacco, either manufactured cigarettes or roll your own. The Treasury has just announced that it will have a new category for heated tobacco products. I don't know exactly what the tax rate should be, but I think having them taxed as tobacco products but less than combustible tobacco products is appropriate. And where exactly that should lie, where they are at the moment, doesn't seem inappropriate, and we can revise that over time.
Sorry, I'm just not sure I'm clear on that. Are you saying that they are taxed at a lower rate than combustible?
Yes, they're taxed on a weight basis. I mean, for a start, they're actually quite low weight. I mean, heat sticks, if you look at the pack, I don't know if you've seen them, are actually smaller. And the weight per kilogram for other tobacco products is significantly lower than for... I mean, I can get the figures for you if you want now.
Right.
Right, so for roll your own, it's £221.18 per kilogram at the moment, whereas for other tobacco products, which is where heat sticks would come in, it's £119.13 per kilogram. So you can see that's significantly lower. And then manufactured cigarettes are taxed at a higher rate than roll your own.
Okay, good. Thank you, Graham.
I understand that the two of you have co-authored a paper on the association between e-cigarettes and smoking. Can you tell the committee your conclusions and findings on that?
So the paper on, is that on youth use?
Yes.
Yes, and thank you for asking that. This recently published paper has been misinterpreted by an American academic as demonstrating strong evidence of a so-called gateway effect. That is not the case. Causal mediation analysis was used to investigate whether there was a causal relationship, and it showed basically it was equally likely you'd move from smoking to vaping or vice versa. Now, although there may be... the other thing to recognise is this was over 6 months, so it's short term and small numbers. The total sample size was about 1,100, and only 21 young people had tried an e-cigarette but not smoked, compared with 118 who'd tried smoking but not e-cigarettes. So, and I think in line with our recent survey, we're not seeing a gateway effect transposing into behaviour at population level amongst young people. So I think our view is, and we were the first people to do a survey looking at youth use, and we think it's really important to keep monitoring it. That's why we carry out an annual survey, and we will continue to do so. But the proportion of young people smoking has continued to decline over the period where e-cigarettes grew most rapidly in popularity, and smoking remains the key problem, not vaping. And many times more young people smoke than vape. So I think, we need to continue to monitor, but there is the sort of headlines you see, particularly in sort of papers like the Mail, that smoking is, vaping is a gateway into smoking for young people. The evidence is not there at the current time. But, that's also why we support an age of sale of 18 and restrictions on advertising of e-cigarettes, because, you want to manage those risks. We don't want to see large numbers of young people taking up vaping and moving on to smoking.
So does that mean that you think, at the moment, young people can't buy e-cigarettes or cigarettes? Do you think there should be any change in the regulatory regimes around e-cigarettes?
We think it needs to be kept under review. There's not really a possibility.
Very political.
Well, but the age of sale of 18, I think, is fine. I don't think we need to move to a rapid change in the regulatory system at the moment, because the evidence that the system we've got is causing problems as opposed to supporting quitting in the context where we're not seeing lots of young people taking up smoking. It's not. There is not a massive problem with the current regulatory system. I'm sure it can be improved and it needs to be reviewed over time. But there's not the possibility in the current political environment for a change in the regulatory system immediately, and I don't think it's necessary.
That's very clear. Thanks.
Thank you. Carol.
Thank you. Do you see any risks in terms of innovation with e-cigarettes that are particularly done to make them more attractive or addictive to young people or vulnerable adults?
I think one needs to separate out attractiveness and addictiveness. The advertising regime is quite clear. There are limited opportunities to advertise, and they have to be advertised in an appropriate way. So I don't think there's a problem there. The products at the moment, and there's not a massive amount of research on the speed of uptake, and speed of uptake is closely linked to the level of addictiveness. It's certainly possible there could be new and innovative products that are more addictive, and there are potential benefits as well as risks, because e-cigarettes at the moment are not a magic bullet. Not all smokers are finding them attractive or useful. Even those who try, many of them decide they're not good enough and not attractive enough and not satisfying enough. So they revert to smoking. Now, if there were products which delivered nicotine more like smoking, they might well be more effective in helping smokers quit. So there's a benefit there, but then there's a concomitant potential risk that they then might be more likely to attract young people in. So, that's something that I think needs to be monitored and managed.
And what about the particular flavours that are marketed? Are you concerned about them at all?
No, I think must be my answer. There are concerns about flavours which appear to be attractive to young people. Yeah. I don't think we're finding that it's a massive factor in young people trying e-cigarettes. They're more trying because
they report that they're trying them because peers are trying them, and just to give them a go. Flavours aren't a very big factor in young people's use, but they appear to be important in adult use, and also the range of flavours means that people can move away from tobacco flavours, which for some smokers or ex-smokers is really important. So I guess it's the same with the addictiveness point. There are pros and cons of flavours, and they are part of the reason why e-cigarettes are as attractive as they are to adult smokers.
I mean, nicotine is an aversive substance. It's quite difficult to inhale. Smoke facilitates inhaling it into your lungs. The flavours help smokers find them something they can move to, so I think they play an important role. But they are also potentially part of the risk in the product. We don't know what the impact of all the flavours are. There have been some flavours that have been identified as being positively harmful, and they've been banned, and the EU regulatory system enables, if there's evidence about others being harmful, they can be banned too.
Okay. How do we make sure we're getting the message out to young people about the risks from e-cigarettes?
Well, I think the best way to get messages to young people is the same as the best way to get messages to adults, and it's been very successful in reducing smoking prevalence, which is mass media campaigns backed up by social media and digital media. But actually, my concern is that we've seen spend on tobacco, anti-tobacco campaigns cut in recent years. At its peak, the government was spending nearly 25 million a year on those campaigns in 2009-10, which was sort of pretty much in line with best practice. The most recent year for which we have a figure, which was 16-17, was only 4 million. I don't have a figure for the current year.
25 to 4 million.
Yeah, so it's been a massive, massive cut, and we are worried about that. And that's been associated with declining uptake of stop smoking services. So I think there are risks around all of that. And actually, one of the things PHE has to be applauded for is that in its most recent October campaign, it used that to promote quitting, but also to promote a positive role for e-cigarettes. So I think it's important that young people understand the risks of smoking, and e-cigarettes are put in that context, because actually believing that nicotine causes cancer, which actually a significant minority of adults and children do seem to believe, is not helpful or positive. And the misunderstandings we see are not helpful to continuing to reduce smoking prevalence. We want to develop a better understanding of nicotine and the role it plays.
Can I also ask, you said 25 to 4, which is just unthinkable, really, but you also mentioned quitting services. What about the funding to these? Has that remained steady?
Well, as you know, in the coalition government, there was a move from public health being run by the NHS to local authorities, and there were transfer of budgets, and initially that was fine, but obviously there have been massive cuts, and there have been cuts in public health as well as cuts in local authority funding, and we're seeing an increasing number of local authorities either cutting back or completely cutting their stop smoking services, and unfortunately it's going along with the NHS not doing what it should be doing in helping smokers quit. And actually in some cases saying it won't fund prescriptions in places where stop smoking services don't exist. So I think it's a very negative landscape.
There does appear at the same time to be an acceleration of reduction in smoking prevalence alongside the cuts in the budget. And I guess that may be, it's hard to see cause and effect, but it may be related to the plain packaging and...
I think it's in this broader context of we are, one of the global leaders in tobacco control, plain packaging, getting rid of sales of tobacco through vending machines, putting cigarettes out of sight, increased taxation year on year above inflation, tackling smuggling. All these things
have actually been effective.
But I mean, the thing about the stop smoking services, I think there's a massive issue of health inequalities. Smoking rates have declined much more rapidly in professional classes than in routine and manual workers and poorer people and more disadvantaged people. And actually that's where stop smoking services and the NHS doing more has a real role to play, and it's not living up to what it should be doing.
Although smoking rates are coming down in the adult population, there is at least one group where we haven't seen progress over the last 12 months, and that's among pregnant women, where rates of smoking throughout pregnancy haven't declined where they had been previously. And it's possible that the lack of coherent service provision across the country is playing a part in why we're not seeing that decline among pregnant women. We don't have good enough data in relation to people with a mental health condition, but given the higher levels of dependency and the barriers that people face, it's plausible that it will cause problems for supporting that community to quit too.
Carol and then Stephen.
Very finally, if I can just ask, is there more we could be doing to support schools and professionals that are working with young people to prevent them taking up e-cigarettes or other cigarettes?
Well, I think schools are always being asked to do new things. My son's a teacher. They don't have capacity to do a lot more unless it can form part of the existing curriculum, and I think that's what's really important. And the harm caused by smoking is an essential element and needs to be an essential element of health education in schools, but also some of the best practice is where it's integrated into other subjects like maths and biology. Half all smokers die prematurely from smoking-related diseases. That's a very simple lesson in probability. And I've seen examples of schools using that, and I think that's very useful. So it needs to be integrated. I think having specialist projects which are funded are A, very expensive, and B, not sustainable.
Okay, thank you.
Stephen.
Thank you very much. Just following on from that before I come to questions around smoking and mental health. The level of experimentation or take-up amongst young people, have we seen a fall in that, just generally, not necessarily related to e-cigarettes, to reinforce whether or not these messages in schools and things are actually getting through?
When you say more generally, do you mean in other things like illegal drugs and alcohol?
No, specifically smoking, but not trying e-cigarettes. Is the number of young people who try a cigarette falling?
Yes.
And have you got any numbers that you can give us roughly over the last 10 years, and perhaps explain why you think that might be?
Is in the smoking, drinking and drug use, and we can send you the more detailed data, but basically smoking rates are going down and experimentation is going down too. So it's, I think in 2006, the rate of child smoking experimentation was 39%, and in 2016, the most recent year, it was 19%.
Okay. So slightly higher than the overall level of smoking, but much lower than it used to be. That's
Yes.
very good.
Yes.
Sorry, Hazel.
Well, that's experimentation, so
That's
ever having tried.
Actual smoking
Yeah,
rates
is much lower.
is
Much lower.
It's like
than
60%.
So that hard-to-reach group that you were talking about will diminish because you're saying that the overall number of people taking up smoking is also falling.
Yes, but my concern would be that the smoking, drinking and drug use survey that comes from doesn't give you class differences because it's a survey of young people in schools. That actually is all these other factors like advertising, promotion, sponsorship are changing. The environment you grow up in is more important. So if your parents smoke, if other people in the household smoke, if you live in a community where smoking is very common, you're much more likely to take up smoking yourself. And of course we're seeing growing class differences there.
So I suppose the point I'm trying to get to is, therefore, even though the budget overall for smoking cessation has fallen, should we be asking for what budget that is spent to be targeted more specifically at the hard-to-reach group rather than just general messaging if we've already succeeded in some of that?
I think there's a difference between general messaging and the provision of services. So I think you're right, in a context where there is a diminishing budget to deliver services directly to people, focusing on those people who face the most barriers to quitting would be an appropriate allocation of resources, but that doesn't replace the need for mass media campaigns and those high impact population level measures which we know have an effect into the poorest communities as well.
And the mass media campaigns, if you ask PHE about them, they'll explain that they do target them. Mass media is good in that way, in that you can target specific populations. You can put advertisements in programmes that are going to be seen by the group you're targeting.
Thank you. Right, but on to smoking and mental health issues, if I may. Now, we asked English mental health trusts about their approach to e-cigarettes, and it seems there's no collective policy on whether or not they should be allowed or encouraged. Do you think it would be useful to have a single policy, a collective and agreed approach to these issues?
Yes, so I just would say a little bit about the Mental Health and Smoking Partnership, who I am representing. So ASH coordinates the partnership. It was set up in 2016. It's co-chaired by Professor Anne McNeill, who's an academic at King's and also the lead author on the recent PHE report on e-cigarettes, and the Right Honourable Paul Burstow, who former Health Minister and now chair of NHS Mental Health Trust, among other things. And its members include the Royal College of Psychiatrists, Rethink Mental Health, etc. And so I'm speaking kind of on behalf of this partnership, this coalition. So we agree that the findings that the committee found in their survey of mental health trusts, the inconsistency that you found between policies is inappropriate. And one of the things that the partnership has been looking at over time has been this issue around e-cigarettes, and we've produced materials which we aimed to help support trusts in thinking about the issue of e-cigarettes, because we were deeply concerned about the variation that we see both between trusts but also within trusts, that individuals could move from ward to ward and not have a clear expectation of what the policy would be around e-cigarettes. Clearly, what you found in your survey work and what we have also found in our engagement with trusts is this massive variation between quite liberal policies that allow quite a variety of different types of electronic cigarettes in a number of different places, through to this complete prohibition. And where we see this complete prohibition, our concern is that this is unfair on service users who are being perhaps detained under the Mental Health Act and not being allowed to smoke in the context of Smokefree NHS, that it doesn't support the implementation of these smoke-free policies, nor the efforts to support more people to quit smoking, and that there is a missed opportunity in how inpatient environments can help inform the community environment, which after all is where the majority of people with a mental health condition are the majority of the time. And what we see is mental health trusts like South London and Maudsley, who were mentioned earlier, who have implemented fairly liberal policies in relation to electronic cigarettes, alongside this comprehensive smoke-free policies and appropriate support for smokers to quit, good quit services. That they have really positive outcomes from those policies. So I wouldn't want the committee to think that allowing the use of electronic cigarettes in mental health trusts are a panacea to all the problems in relation to the high levels of smoking in this community. They certainly aren't, but they do appear to be useful and important part of an overall policy which is focused around how can we support more people to quit smoking. And I really should have said at the beginning, the rates of smoking among people with a mental health condition are incredibly high compared to the general population, and even higher when you look at the population of people in inpatient environments, which some surveys have found to be up to 80%. So really,
and it is the biggest
concern.
cause of premature mortality.
Absolutely. Yeah, indeed. So if we're serious about reducing the difference in life expectancy between people with a mental health condition and the rest of the population, then we really need to bring down the rates of smoking. And I think what the partnership sees in relation to electronic cigarettes is a big opportunity to do something for a population which, as I say, face really big barriers to quitting, have higher levels of addiction, tend to be living in communities where smoking is high, where the healthcare staff that they're engaging with may have quite low expectations of their ability to quit. So, using electronic cigarettes in that way can be really positive. Heather mentioned that there is existing national guidance from Public Health England that is fairly generic in relation to forming policies within organisations. So we do think there is an opportunity to do something that is more specific for mental health trusts and takes into account the complexities that mental health trusts are experiencing. There is also guidance from the CQC. They've produced some guidance in relation to going smoke-free, which looks at e-cigarette policies and says that they should not be routinely treated in the same way as smoking. And in our view, if trusts were taking on board the PHE guidance and the CQC guidance, it's unlikely that we would be seeing these complete prohibitions of e-cigarettes. There is also a programme of work between NHS England and Public Health England through their Leading Change Adding Value programme, which is looking at the rollout of smoke-free policies and e-cigarettes within mental health trusts. I don't think it's desperately well resourced, so there may be an opportunity there for, and clearly it's not widely known about across the mental health sector. But there's an opportunity there to do more. It's within NHS England. They have the lead, and it's a collaboration between NHS England and Public Health England.
Is there a named person who's?
We can find the named person and get back to you.
So we do think that further national guidance would be really welcome, and that's certainly what trusts tell us, that that there are a number of problems that they face in developing their own policy.
Including trusts who have prohibition at the moment?
Including trusts that have prohibition at the moment. So many of them are keen to do the right thing by their staff and patients, obviously, and they're having to make assessments on an individual basis of this complex evidence that's out there in relation to e-cigarettes. And some of them might have done that a number of years ago and now have a policy that they're left.
Is the evidence that complicated? Because we've heard consistently the same message coming through. This is a aid to cessation, and for many people it works and gets them away from cigarettes.
Well, there is certainly a misunderstanding of the best available evidence that's out there that's in the population.
Which is a bit worrying within the NHS.
Well, people who work in mental health trusts, I guess, are not necessarily that different from the rest of the population. So the fact that we have such widespread misunderstanding in the population of what the evidence tells us, it's not surprising that trusts are coming to different views about what the evidence says. So I think national guidance on that would be welcome, and then teasing out what the complexities are in mental health settings and how people might be able to move forward in those different environments. Ash is being commissioned by Cancer Research UK to undertake a survey of mental health trusts over this summer in relation to implementing NICE guidance and looking at what's happened around e-cigarettes and smoke-free policies. So hopefully the find I do think is really important.
And the committee's survey is very helpful to us actually in looking at this. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I suppose one final question is that in the government's tobacco control plan, it talks about some professionals mistakenly believe that stopping smoking could negatively affect the patient's mental health. Presumably you don't agree with that statement, and what can we do to ensure that those with mental health conditions properly get the help to stop smoking?
Yes, I think not only do we need some central guidance and policy in relation to the e-cigarettes and smoke-free policies, but also greater investment into the training of mental health staff, given the sizable part of the population that they're working with who smoke, not only in relation to e-cigarettes but more generally in smoking cessation and tobacco and how to intervene. The partnership is producing materials that aim to kind of tackle some of the myths that are in mental health services and backing it up with further resources, but as a kind of charitably funded collection of voluntary sector academia and professional bodies, there's a limited amount we can do to intervene into mental health trusts. So absolutely more training and support of mental health staff to be able to challenge these misunderstandings which are really prevalent, but also give them the skills to really intervene with that population would be brilliant.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Do you feel that through your grouping that you're getting good engagement from NHS England, or do you think there is a need for them to elevate the priority that they're giving to this?
So tobacco and the impact of smoking is mentioned in the 5-year forward view for mental health, and that's really welcome. And there's a lot of pressures into mental health services at the moment, undeniably. However, if there is a genuine desire within NHS England and across mental health services to do something about this discrepancy in life expectancy, then it would be welcome to see stronger engagement from NHS England and mental health services on this specific agenda.
But can I add to that, because it's not just on the mental health agenda. I mean, the Tobacco Control Plan commits to implementation of NICE guidance. We know from a survey by the British Thoracic Society that the NHS implementation of NICE guidance on smoking cessation is not good.
In what respect?
Well, smokers with smoking-related diseases are not being asked if they smoke. If they are asked if they smoke, they're not being offered encouragement or advice to quit, and they're not being prescribed medication. Some hospitals still don't have them on their formulary. We'd like to see NHS England having a strategy for tackling smoking, which includes, mental health is a really important part of that, but it needs to be a coherent strategy by NHS England around how it will meet its commitments in the Tobacco Control Plan for England. Public Health England's got a strategy, but NHS England doesn't. And I think it has a really important role to play. And I know the NHS has got all the challenges it has and everything, but this is an important part, not just for people with mental health conditions, but smoking-related disease is very costly.
Well, that would reduce cost pressures on
it. It would reduce cost pressures. And reduce readmissions. There are all sorts of benefits it would have, but it's not seen as core to NHS work. I mean, Simon Stevens has been very positive about prevention, and I know he thinks smoking is important, but the problem is prevention is always low down the list of priorities, and up top is all the sort of immediate pressures, the winter crisis and everything.
Just before I bring in Bill finally, can I just ask, is there any emerging evidence from Australia, I guess unlikely to be yet from the UK, but on plain packaging, standardised packaging, can we associate it with any reduction, or is it just impossible to tell what's cause and effect?
It's fairly early on, because a bit like advertising, there's a sort of cohort effect in that children growing up now will never see those glitzy packets. But there is some initial evidence, and I can send you the exact evidence, which did seem to show an immediate impact on numbers of smokers trying to quit and on youth use. But I can send you that, and there is some research going on. Cancer Research UK has funded some research on the impact of plain packaging, but it's a bit early to say here. But I think what we can see is that as part of a comprehensive approach, we're basically a dark market for tobacco now. The pack was the last way in which they could really promote their brands, and we're certainly seeing in the UK as well that sort of the premium brands don't have the cut through they used to have. So I think smokers are trading down.
Okay, thank you very much. Bill.
Thank you, Chair. Hazel, in your introduction you mentioned the responsibility of discouraging pregnant women from smoking, and you mentioned it elsewhere. In that regard, would it be wise to, where women who are pregnant, who are conventional smokers, would it be wise to encourage them to migrate to e-cigarettes, or would we be better focusing on discouraging them from smoking altogether? Where would you put your resources? To migrate to e-cigarettes, or would you still focus on stopping smoking?
Sure. I'll just do a little intro to the Smoking and Pregnancy Challenge Group.
And also for Deborah as well. I'm not cutting you, you were taking it.
I'll start and Deborah can chip in. There's a Smoking and Pregnancy Challenge Group established in 2012 to support the government's ambition to reduce smoking in pregnancy, a coalition of the Royal College of Midwives, Royal College of Obs and Gynae, the Lullaby Trust and other leading baby charities. And so I think... should I just keep
going?
Yeah. So currently, as I said, we haven't seen a lot of progress in the reduction of smoking among pregnant women over the last 12 months, and it's around just under 11%, between 10 and 11%. While most women, when they are trying to become pregnant or when they find out they're pregnant, will quit smoking, those that don't have as I keep saying, higher levels of addiction and are from communities where smoking is more common. They tend to be younger. They tend to be more disadvantaged, more economically disadvantaged. So they face major barriers to quitting. So it's really important that those women are identified quickly and given access to the best support that they can be to help them quit smoking. And that is the evidence-based support that we provide through Stop Smoking services. Now, there are problems with that, which we've already talked about, and the performance of local health care systems really varies. So we don't think that electronic cigarettes are an alternative to providing that high-quality support. However, we have to recognise that for some women, using an e-cigarette is how they will be able to abstain from smoking in pregnancy, and it's much better for both mother and baby than continuing to smoke. So we've produced guidance for midwives and visual aids for pregnant women, which we can provide to the committee, which talks about how to make an informed decision about using e-cigarettes. So we want health professionals to give women the advice around using evidence-based stop smoking services and medications, but also if women don't want to access a service or can't access the service, if the services aren't working for them, or if they want to use an electronic cigarette as the way for abstaining from smoking, then they need to be given the advice that all the evidence we have suggests, or the evidence that we have suggests, that using an e-cigarette will be safer than continuing to smoke. So without this advice, our concern is that there is a risk that women might revert to smoking, and that women need to have confidence in these products, that they are a safer alternative if they're going to be encouraged to use them sufficiently. Some of the findings presented in our submission from early research have shown that pregnant women who are using e-cigarettes feel that there's a real stigma attached to them using them, and that they are worried about using them in public. And our concern about that is that they might not use them enough, and there's a risk that they then continue to smoke because they're not getting enough nicotine through alternative sources. Also, the advice healthcare professionals provide is really important. From my own experience, I've been in sessions with one nurse in particular who was telling me about a woman who'd come into the practice, who had quit smoking, using an e-cigarette, had seen a headline about how awful e-cigarettes were, had gone back to smoking, and was asking the nurse for advice. And she said, "What should I have said?" And I asked her what she did say, and she said, "Well, I didn't say anything because I didn't know what to say." Well, that's not an okay position for healthcare professionals to be adopting. They need to be communicating to pregnant women and to all smokers that using an electronic cigarette is safer than continuing to smoke.
Do you think practice varies a lot around the country?
Yes, I do. I think the advice that we have provided through the Smoking and Pregnancy Challenge Group has been very widely disseminated, and actually NHS England and Public Health England have been really good partners in getting that information out there. So I think there is less variability in practice than there might otherwise be, but there continues to be variability in practice even around the prescription of nicotine replacement therapy, which has been licensed as for use in pregnancy for over a decade, and there's still uncertainty among midwifery and other maternity staff about whether it's okay to use NRT in pregnancy, where the evidence we have is clear that it is safe for use in pregnancy, and the studies that we have had which have shown been cause for concern have tended to be in mice, and it turns out when you translate that into humans, it doesn't have the same, the evidence doesn't translate across into humans. Also, what's one of the concerns that's out there is whether we know enough about e-cigarettes, whether the evidence is specific to pregnancy. And we don't have a great deal of evidence that's specific to pregnancy, but we do know a lot about what the toxins that are in tobacco smoke and how they are dangerous for the unborn baby. So one of the toxins which is most dangerous in pregnancy is carbon monoxide, the byproduct of combustion, which is obviously not in e-cigarettes because there is no combustion, and that when a woman is inhaling carbon monoxide, she's oxygen starving her baby, which results in the illnesses and abnormalities, and sometimes sadly
smaller babies more likely to be in special care baby units after birth,
and a greater instance of stillbirth and miscarriage. Cutting out even just carbon monoxide is a great step forward. So we need women to be informed that we don't know everything about e-cigarettes, but that if they are using them as an alternative to smoking, then they will be substantially protecting themselves and their baby from the harms of continuing to smoke. And just say one more thing, sorry, that there may well be some other advantages from encouraging or at least supporting women to use electronic cigarettes during pregnancy. One of the big problems is that women often relapse to smoking once the baby is born. And electronic cigarettes might well be a route to enable parents to not smoke, or to keep their house smoke-free if they're not able to abstain completely. And one of the findings from this year's survey, we looked at parents who vape, who have children under the age of 5, and they're twice as likely to say that the main reason that they use electronic cigarettes is to protect others from second-hand smoke. So I think we can see that probably parents are using those products already to keep their home smoke-free, so there may be a potential to improve that in the future.
Just my final question. You introduced a third element there, that was nicotine replacement therapy from the individual who is a smoker and who is pregnant. Would you prefer to direct them to nicotine replacement therapy in the first instance as opposed to the use of e-cigarettes? What would be the order of merit in that regard?
I think ideally,
I know the first one would be to stop smoking, surely must be the priority.
Yeah, I think if you were going to do a hierarchy, you would have the women quit before conception, quit when they find out they're pregnant, and then access to stop smoking services and the evidence-based medication that we have absolute confidence in, and then I think e-cigarettes is the next kind of layer of intervention.
And followed thirdly by the therapy, the nicotine replacement therapy.
So I think the behavioural support and the medication comes together,
right,
and I think e-cigarettes as well can be used alongside behavioural
because
support.
Because you could have a process that takes weeks whilst the damage continues to be done. Presumably, you need to. I mean, if there's it's better presumably to get a pregnant woman using an e-cigarette rather than smoking as early as possible, rather than going through a whole
But
process.
you can have that discussion on booking, and if it's clear she's not interested in,
so you deal with it all up front.
You should be able to deal with it all up front, and there's training needs there, obviously.
Have you finished yours?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Carol.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Just, can I actually ask about couples that are trying to conceive? And nicotine, I believe, has an effect on sperm. Has there been any studies into the impact of e-cigarette use on couples who are trying to get pregnant?
So we might need to come back to you on the specific of the evidence around nicotine, because my understanding is that it's not nicotine, it's tobacco smoke that has the impact on sperm. I'm not aware that there's any current research in relation to vaping and
There's
conception.
good research on tobacco smoking, both for the fertility of men and women. It damages sperm, but it also
But we don't think that applies to vaping.
I don't think it applies just to nicotine, but we can double check and come back to the committee. But I don't think there's been any specific research looking at conception.
But again, on
vaping.
relative risk,
Yes.
it's the smoke that does most of the damage.
So the smoke is... Yeah, I had found a site a minute ago, but obviously I'm not sure of the... of where these sites are getting their evidence. So
we'll look at it. But
I think that would be really useful if you could
Much of the research that has been done internationally has been, as I say, in mice, and the evidence that applies to humans seems not to be there. So, I mean, the evidence is really strong around tobacco smoke, and we can clarify the point around nicotine.
And I think the message is, if you're trying to conceive, then you should certainly quit smoking. And it's probably best not to vape or or drink too much or all these other things. But at the end of the day, it's the relative risk that is the key thing. So certainly quit smoking.
Okay, thank you.
But just to finish on this issue of pregnancy, we're saying that currently more than 1 in 10 women smoke during pregnancy.
Smoke to the end of pregnancy. So the data that we have is from smoking at time of delivery. So actually more women than that will smoke during their pregnancy.
Right. More than 1 in 10?
Yeah.
So there's a significant public health issue here that still needs to be more effectively addressed.
Absolutely.
And it's a core part of the government wants to reduce stillbirth and perinatal mortality. Absolutely right. It's a leading modifiable risk factor, so we need to do more.
Okay.
Supplementary, I read and note that women are giving birth late in life, in their 30s as opposed to earlier on, for various reasons, and as is their right. Does the smoking have a greater impact on the older mother, or is it exactly the same to the older mother or the younger mother?
Older women are less likely to smoke in pregnancy than younger women.
Right.
And older women tend to be who are giving birth tend to be from higher socioeconomic groups and are less likely to smoke anyway.
But if they do smoke, they'll have been smoking for longer, and obviously the number of years you smoke will have an impact too.
Yeah.
And Stephen?
Thank you. Just to come to my attention, someone's just sent me an email about Vapril. Are you aware of Vapril? And are you supporting it?
Vapril, I think, is an initiative of the UK Vaping Industry Association, which is a tobacco industry-funded trade body. PHE's been working with the Independent British Vape Trade Association, which is non-tobacco industry-linked. As you know, we're a party to the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. It's fine for them to do what they do, but we certainly wouldn't partner with tobacco industry-funded bodies.
No, I can understand that, but the principle of...
we think promoting vaping is a good thing, yes, in principle.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you both very much indeed. Really useful and interesting session. Thank you. Order.